I never thought the day I finally stood up for myself would be the day I handed my mother an envelope full of trash. The fluorescent lights of the downtown diner flickered overhead as I untied my grease-stained apron for the second time that day. My feet screamed in protest, swollen and aching from the double shift I had just pulled. 16 hours of carrying plates, forcing smiles at impatient customers, and pretending the constant pain shooting up my spine didn't exist. But none of that mattered when I felt the thin envelope in my pocket, the one containing my bi-weekly paycheck. This wasn't just paper and ink. This was blood, sweat, and every single shattered dream I still dared to have for my son, Jax. I stepped out into the back alley, the cool October air hitting my face like a slap of reality. The dim streetlight cast long shadows between the dumpsters, and for a moment, just a fleeting moment, I let myself breathe. I let myself imagine what it would be like if this money was actually mine. If I could use it to buy Jax those new sneakers he desperately needed, the ones without holes that let the rain soak through to his socks. If I could finally fix the heater in our bedroom so he wouldn't wake up shivering in the middle of the night. But that fantasy died as quickly as it was born because I knew what waited for me at home. The bus ride back to the house felt longer than usual, each stop a countdown to the inevitable confrontation. I clutched my purse tighter, feeling the envelope inside like a lead weight. Through the grimy window, I watched the city transition from the bustling downtown to the quieter residential streets of Maplewood. The neighborhood where I grew up, the neighborhood that now felt like a prison. Our house sat at the end of Birch Street, a small two-story structure that had seen better days. The white paint was peeling, the front porch sagged slightly on one side, and the lawn was more weeds than grass. It was a stark contrast to the image my family desperately tried to project to the world. Inside those walls lived my mother Brenda, my father Richard, my younger sister Tiffany, and my 6-year-old son Jax. And inside those walls, I was nothing more than a paycheck with legs. I pushed open the front door, the familiar creak announcing my arrival. The house was dim except for the harsh light spilling from the kitchen. I could hear the television blaring from the living room, some sports game that Richard was undoubtedly glued to, and I could see my mother's silhouette at the kitchen table, perfectly still, waiting like a spider in its web. Jax was already asleep, thank God. I had checked on him through the window before coming in, his small form curled up in the twin bed we shared in the smallest bedroom. At least he was spared this nightly ritual. I barely had time to close the door before my mother's voice cut through the air, sweet as poisoned honey. "Don't bother taking off your coat, Alara. Hand it over." Brenda sat at the kitchen table, her hair perfectly coiffed despite the late hour, her manicured nails drumming an impatient rhythm on the worn formica surface. She wore a silk blouse that cost more than I made in a week, courtesy of my last paycheck. Her smile was plastered on her face, but her eyes were cold, calculating. I stood in the doorway, my hand instinctively moving to protect the envelope in my purse. For the first time in months, maybe years, I hesitated. "Jax needs new shoes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Winter is coming, and his toes are already cramped in the ones he has." My mother's smile didn't waver, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. She didn't even stand up. Instead, her hand moved slowly, deliberately, to the decorative ceramic bowl sitting on the table, a heavy, expensive piece she had made me buy for her last month. Her fingers curled around it possessively. "You think your wants matter?" Her voice was still sweet, but now there was an edge to it, sharp as broken glass. "Your sister needs a new designer handbag for her influencer launch party next week. She has an image to maintain, Alara, an image that brings value to this family. What do you bring besides your pathetic paychecks?" From the living room, I heard Richard grunt in agreement, though his eyes never left the television screen. My father had perfected the art of being present while remaining completely absent, a willing accomplice to my mother's tyranny through his sheer indifference. Something inside me shifted in that moment. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was the thought of Jax's cold feet, or maybe it was just the final thread of my dignity refusing to snap completely. I pulled the envelope from my purse and walked to the table, but I didn't hand it over immediately. Instead, I slammed it down on the surface, my hand still gripping it firmly. "You'll get what's left after Jax eats," I said, and even I was surprised by the steel in my voice. The room went silent except for the drone of the television. My mother's face transformed, the sweet mask cracking to reveal the rage beneath. In one swift motion, she snatched at the envelope, but I had already torn off a small corner, revealing a few bills. I shoved the rest under her grasping hand, my small act of defiance feeling like a monumental victory. "Insolent bitch," she hissed, rising from her chair. What happened next felt like it occurred in slow motion. My mother's hand closed around the ceramic bowl, her knuckles white with fury. She hurled it at me with surprising force, and I barely had time to duck. The bowl sailed past my head, missing me by inches, and shattered against the wall behind me with a deafening crash. Shards of ceramic exploded across the floor, glittering like malicious stars in the harsh kitchen light. The sound jolted Jax awake. I heard his frightened whimper from upstairs, that small, heartbreaking sound that every mother dreads hearing. It cut through me like a knife, and I started toward the stairs, toward my son. But I was stopped by the click of heels on hardwood. "Oh, Alara, still trying to resist?" Tiffany glided into the kitchen like she was walking a runway, her phone already held up, recording. At 23, my sister had perfected the art of cruelty disguised as concern. Her highlighted hair was styled in perfect waves, her makeup flawless even at this late hour, and her designer outfit probably cost more than 3 of my paychecks combined. She had never worked a day in her life, had never had to, because she had me. "It's pathetic," she continued, zooming the camera in on my face, capturing my exhaustion, my defeat. "You're just the help, Alara. The background noise. You exist so I can shine brighter. Dad said so himself." She said it so casually, so matter-of-factly, that it took a moment for the words to fully register. I looked at Richard, still in his recliner, and he didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just shrugged, as if Tiffany had merely stated an obvious truth. I stood there, my back literally against the wall, pieces of broken ceramic at my feet, my son crying upstairs, and my family looking at me like I was something they had scraped off their shoes. And in that moment, something inside me didn't break. It hardened. It crystallized into something cold and sharp and unbreakable. I picked up Jax's whimpering form when I got upstairs, holding him close, whispering soothing words I didn't feel. But as I rocked him back to sleep, I made a promise to myself, and to him. This wasn't going to be our life anymore. I was going to take everything they valued, their perfect image, their control, their carefully constructed lies, and I was going to burn it all to the ground. After that night, I became a different person, though they didn't notice at first. I still handed over my paychecks, still endured their insults, still played the role of the family's cash cow. But now I was watching, learning, planning. Every slight, every cruelty, every moment of humiliation became ammunition. The following weeks fell into a grim pattern. Every payday, I would come home to find my mother waiting, hand outstretched, entitlement etched into every line of her face. The amounts she demanded grew larger, the justifications more absurd. Tiffany needed a new laptop for her social media content. Richard wanted a golf club membership to network with important people. Brenda decided the living room needed redecorating because the neighbors might judge. I gave them the money, but I started keeping records. Every transaction, every demand. I documented it all in a small notebook I kept hidden in Jax's toy box. I also started recording things on my phone, little snippets of their cruelty that I saved in a hidden folder. Tiffany made it easy. She loved to document everything, including her own malice. One Saturday afternoon, I ran into them at Riverside Grocery, the local supermarket where I did our weekly shopping with whatever scraps were left after the family took their cut. I was in the discount aisle, comparing prices on generic cereal, Jax holding my hand and looking longingly at the colorful boxes of name-brand options he knew we couldn't afford. "Ilara, darling, is that you?" My mother's voice rang out across the aisle, loud enough to make other shoppers turn. She and Tiffany approached with their cart overflowing with organic produce, imported cheeses, and premium cuts of meat. Tiffany had her phone out, of course, recording what she probably thought would be amusing content for her followers. "Still feeding Jax that garbage?" Tiffany said, peering into my cart with exaggerated disgust. She picked up the box of generic cereal I was holding and made a face. "Don't you care about his health, Alara? Growing boys need proper nutrition, not this processed trash." Several nearby shoppers had stopped to watch, their expressions ranging from curiosity to uncomfortable sympathy. I felt Jax's hand tighten in mine, felt his small body press against my leg, trying to hide from the attention. My mother smiled at the gathering audience, playing the role of the concerned grandmother to perfection. "We keep offering to help," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "But Alara is so proud, so stubborn. She insists on doing everything herself, even if it means her son suffers." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell everyone there that the reason I was in the discount aisle was because these two women took 90% of my income to fund their lavish lifestyle. But I didn't. I just smiled, paid for my groceries, and left. But I noticed something important that day. I noticed the way some of the neighbors looked at my mother and Tiffany, a flicker of doubt in their eyes. The performance wasn't as convincing as they thought. At home, Richard was no better. When I finally gathered the courage to ask him for help buying Jack's new shoes, showing him the worn-out sneakers with holes in the soles, he barely glanced up from his newspaper. "He'll learn resilience," Richard said dismissively. "Character is built through adversity, Alara. Besides, Tiffany needs new tires for her car. Appearances matter in her line of work. People judge you by what you drive." I looked at him, really looked at him, and wondered when my father had become this person. When had he decided that his youngest daughter's comfort mattered more than his grandson's basic needs? Or had he always been this way, and I had just been too young, too naive to see it? But I didn't argue. Instead, I went to work, pulled extra shifts, and quietly opened a savings account at a different bank across town. It was a small act of rebellion, putting away $20 here, $30 there, money I could hide from my family's grasping hands. I told the bank teller it was for my son's future, and the kind woman had smiled sadly, as if she understood more than I had said. I also started confiding in Michael, a line cook at the diner who had worked there for years. He was a kind man, a grandfather himself, and he had noticed my exhaustion, the bruises I sometimes couldn't quite hide, the way I would flinch when someone raised their voice. One night, during a rare slow period, I found myself telling him everything. The words poured out of me like a dam breaking, and he listened without judgment, his weathered face growing darker with each revelation. "If you ever need help, Alara," he said when I finished, "you call me, day or night. I mean it. Nobody should have to live like that." I thanked him, and though I didn't think I would take him up on the offer, it felt good to have an ally, someone who knew the truth. At home, Jax was getting older, more observant. He had started asking questions that broke my heart. "Mama," he said one night as I tucked him into our shared bed, "why does Aunt Tiffany get everything shiny, and I only get what's left?" I held him close, feeling his small heart beat against my chest, and I whispered the words that had become my mantra. "Not forever, baby. Not forever." The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in late October. I had just finished another double shift, and my entire body was one massive ache. I walked in to find the house filled with the mouth-watering aroma of Chinese takeout from Golden Dragon, the slightly upscale restaurant downtown that we could never afford. Or rather, that I could never afford. My family, it seemed, had no such limitations. The dining table was set, an unusual occurrence in our household. Richard sat at the head, Brenda to his right, and Tiffany across from her, already picking at her portion with chopsticks. There were 4 containers of food, each one generous and steaming. My stomach growled audibly, and I realized I hadn't eaten since a stale bagel at 6 that morning. "Ah, Alara, you're home," Richard said, not looking up from his sweet and sour chicken. "We saved you something." He reached under the table and pulled out a small, grease-stained container, the kind they used for side orders. He slid it across the table toward me, and I saw he had written something on the lid with a marker. "For the dog, Alara. Don't want to upset your delicate palate." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at the container, at the mocking message, at my father's completely indifferent face. This was it. This was the moment that everything shattered. Tiffany's laughter filled the room, high and cruel. She had her phone out again, recording my reaction, zooming in on my face to capture every moment of my humiliation. "Oh my God, Mom, look at her face!" she shrieked with delight. "She looks like she's about to cry. This is gold, pure gold. My followers are going to love this." I felt something break inside me, but it wasn't weakness. It was the final chain that had been holding me in place, keeping me compliant, keeping me silent. I looked at the container of food, at my family's satisfied, smug faces, and I felt a cold fury settle over me like a cloak. But before I could say anything, before I could move, Jax appeared in the doorway. He had been upstairs, and the commotion had drawn him down. He took one look at the scene, at my face, at the pathetic container of scraps on the table, and his small features twisted with an anger I had never seen in him before. He walked to the table, picked up his own untouched plate, full of orange chicken and fried rice and egg rolls, and pushed it toward me. "Mama," he said, his voice small but fierce, "you can have mine." "I'm not hungry." The room went silent. Even Tiffany lowered her phone slightly, shock replacing her glee. I looked at my son, at his brave, beautiful face, and I felt something shift in the universe. This child, this precious 6-year-old boy, had more dignity and compassion in his little finger than my entire family had in their bodies. I gently pushed his plate back toward him, my hand steady despite the rage boiling inside me. "No, baby," I said, my voice low and controlled. "You eat. I've had enough of their scraps." I stood up slowly, deliberately, and I looked at each of them in turn. My father, with his newspaper and his indifference. My mother, with her perfect hair and her perfect cruelty. My sister, with her phone and her endless narcissism. "Things are about to change," I said, and my voice was ice and steel and promise. The laughter died instantly. Brenda's fork clattered against her plate. Richard's fist came down on the table, making the dishes jump. "Don't you threaten us, girl," he blustered, but I saw fear flicker in his eyes. Tiffany's camera lowered completely, and for the first time in years, I saw uncertainty on her face. I took Jax's hand and walked out of the room without another word, leaving them in stunned silence. Upstairs, I held my son and made plans. Real plans. Concrete plans. Plans that would end this nightmare once and for all. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. I used the money from my secret account to secure a small studio apartment across town. A tiny place, but it was ours. Mine and Jax's. I packed our meager belongings in trash bags and hid them in the basement. I contacted Michael and explained what I needed. I reached out to neighbors, carefully, subtly, planting seeds of doubt about my family's perfect facade. And I waited for the next payday. When it came, I was ready. I walked into that house one last time with Jax holding my hand, and I was different. I had showered and dressed carefully, my hair clean and pulled back, my clothes simple but neat. I stood taller, looked them in the eye, felt the power of someone who had nothing left to lose. Brenda was waiting at the kitchen table, of course, her hand already outstretched, entitlement carved into every line of her face. "Don't waste my time, Alara," she said. "Where's my money?" I met her gaze, unwavering. "It's not your money. It never was." Richard stood from his recliner, his face reddening, veins throbbing at his temples. "Don't push your luck, girl. You know what happens when you disobey." He took a menacing step toward me, and I saw his hand rise slightly, the threat of violence implicit in every movement. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I walked calmly to the front door and opened it wide. Standing on the porch was a crowd, not just the few neighbors I had invited, but more, drawn by curiosity and the whispered rumors that something was about to happen at the Harper house. Michael was there, his kind face set in grim determination. Mrs. Chen from next door, the Johnsons from across the street, the Martinez family. At least 15 people, all watching, all waiting. And there, at the back of the crowd, was Tyler, Tiffany's on-again, off-again boyfriend, the successful young lawyer she had been desperately trying to impress for months. My mother's face went white. Tiffany appeared from the kitchen, took one look at the crowd, and her confident smirk faltered. "What is this?" Brenda demanded, but her voice shook. I pulled out a thick envelope from my purse, the one containing my paycheck, and I held it up for everyone to see. "You want this, Brenda?" I said loudly, my voice carrying to every person on that porch. "Then tell them. Tell them why your daughter works 3 jobs while you sit at home. Tell them why your golden child, Tiffany," I pointed at my sister, whose face had gone from pale to red, has never earned a dime, yet lives lavishly off my sweat. The crowd murmured, shocked eyes turning to my mother and sister. "She's lying," Brenda stammered, looking around at the neighbors. "It's just family business." She's always been dramatic, always trying to cause trouble. But then Jax spoke up, his small voice cutting through the excuses like a blade. "Grandma threw a bowl at Mama," he said, his words clear and true. "And Grandpa said Mama eats dog food." The murmuring grew louder. I saw Mrs. Chen's hand fly to her mouth in horror. "Mr. Johnson shook his head in disgust. "Get out of my house," Richard roared, his face purple now. "All of you, get out." But I wasn't done. I pulled out my phone and pressed play on a recording. Tiffany's voice, captured just days ago, filled the air, clear and damning. "Honestly, Alara's just practice. She exists so I can shine brighter," Dad said it himself. "She's like a plant you use to make the real flowers look better. Disposable, replaceable." The reaction was instantaneous. Tyler's face contorted with disgust, and he turned and walked away without a word, his expensive shoes clicking on the sidewalk as he disappeared into the night. Tiffany's scream of anguish followed him, but he didn't look back. The neighbors exchanged horrified glances. Some were openly disgusted, others were whispering behind their hands, and I knew that by tomorrow, everyone in Maplewood would know the truth about the Harper family. But I had one more card to play. I stepped forward and placed the envelope on the coffee table with exaggerated care. Brenda lunged for it, snatching it up with greedy hands, ripping it open triumphantly. But instead of cash, instead of the money she felt entitled to, a shower of worthless scraps fell out onto the table and floor. Old grocery receipts, torn pieces of junk mail, a few expired coupons, a crayon drawing Jax had made, depicting our family with him and me on one side and them on the other, a giant wall between us. My mother stared at the trash, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a fish. "That's what you always gave me," I said, my voice ringing through the shocked silence. "Worthless scraps, and now, it's all you'll ever get." I took Jax's hand, and we walked toward the door. Michael was waiting by his car, ready to drive us to our new apartment. As I passed my family one last time, I looked at them, really looked at them. Brenda was sobbing, her perfect makeup running in black streams down her face. Richard stood frozen, the reality of his destroyed reputation settling on his shoulders. Tiffany was screaming, her phone forgotten on the floor, her carefully constructed influencer image shattered in one devastating moment. I smiled then, a real smile, one that came from somewhere deep and true and free. "Goodbye," I said simply. Jax and I got into Michael's car, and as we pulled away from Birch Street, I looked back one last time through the rear window. The crowd was dispersing, their disgusted looks and pitying glances the final nails in my family's social coffin. The house that had been my prison sat there, looking smaller now, less significant. "Are we really free, Mama?" Jax asked, his small hand in mine. "Yes, baby," I whispered. "We really are." Our new apartment was tiny, just one room with a small kitchenette and a bathroom, but it was ours. That first night, Jax and I sat on the floor because we didn't have furniture yet, sharing a pizza that Michael had kindly bought for us. It was the best meal I had ever tasted. In the weeks that followed, I heard through the grapevine what happened to my family. Richard lost his position on the neighborhood council after the story spread. Brenda became a pariah at her social clubs, the women who had once envied her now whispering behind her back. Tiffany's influencer dreams crumbled as Tyler spread the word among their social circle, and her follower count plummeted when videos of her cruelty started circulating online, shared by neighbors who had witnessed the confrontation. They tried to reach out, of course, desperate calls and messages, alternating between threats and pleas. But I blocked every number, returned every letter unopened. They had taken enough from me. They would get nothing more. I found a better job. Just one job at a small accounting firm where my boss appreciated my work ethic and paid me fairly. Jax got his new shoes and a warm winter coat and toys that were his alone. We built a life, small and simple, but it was honest and it was ours. The scars remained, of course. Sometimes I would wake up from nightmares, hearing my mother's voice or feeling the phantom sting of my father's indifference. But Jax was always there, his small arms wrapping around me, reminding me why I had been strong enough to break free. 6 months after I left, I ran into my mother at a grocery store, a different one than before, in a nicer part of town. She looked older, smaller somehow. Her perfect facade crumbled to reveal the bitter, frightened woman beneath. She opened her mouth to speak, but I walked past her without a word. She didn't deserve my anger or my forgiveness. She didn't deserve anything from me at all. Now, a year later, Jax and I sit in our small apartment, which we've slowly filled with secondhand furniture and small treasures from thrift stores. He's doing well in school, his teacher says he's bright and kind, and every night he tells me about his day with excitement in his eyes. He has friends now, real friends, and he's learning what it means to be valued for who he is, not what he can provide. As for me, I'm learning too. Learning that my worth isn't measured by how much I can sacrifice, how much I can endure. Learning that love shouldn't hurt, shouldn't diminish, shouldn't leave scars. Learning that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who are supposed to love you but never learned how. The scars I carry now are different. They're not marks of shame or defeat. They're proof that I survived, that I fought back, that I chose my son and myself over the toxic ties of blood. They're reminders that I am stronger than I ever knew, braver than I ever imagined. And every time I look at Jax, thriving and happy and safe, I know that every moment of that fight was worth it. I gave him the one thing my family never gave me, the knowledge that he is valuable, that he is loved, that he deserves to take up space in this world. We are free now, truly free. And we are building something beautiful from the ashes of what we left behind. The scars we wear are no longer symbols of our pain. They are badges of our survival, our resilience, our unbreakable bond, and that is worth everything.